Henrietta Marie. At 87 years of age, Henrietta Marie could remember the tiniest details of her childhood and reflect on the overall tapestry of her life. That was her task now as she sat on her dark green porch swing overlooking her rose garden. She had earned the right of contemplation. She kept her silver hair tied back in 2 braids, which she plaited every morning. Her blue-green eyes were bright and focused. Henrietta preferred pale green dresses and wore a beige apron with a large pocket filled with a few tools for daily life, a thimble, needle and thread, a white handkerchief, and her worn leather-covered journal. The journal contained articles that she had written many years ago under the pen name of Henry Mariette. No article would ever have been published with a woman's signature. As Henry Mariette, no one had ever suspected. Her articles had created a stir in society. She felt a sense of accomplishment in having spoken her truth. Her strong, unconventional views were told, and no one would ever know the whole truth. She smiled inwardly at the consolation of the contradiction. Henrietta's mind was a windmill, constantly turning over the gusts of change in her long lifetime. She gave herself permission to go back to her earliest memory, before the turn of the century, in the 1700s, when she was a little girl living in England. Henrietta could remember the smell of the salt breezes from the ocean as she stood shivering on the shabby wooden pier, while her father, in a drunken stupor, had cracked the bottle of champagne on the bow of the ship in the naming ceremony. The bell on the ship, newly cast and bearing the name, the Henrietta Marie, had been rung 3 times to commemorate the occasion. Her father had announced proudly that his wooden ship was registered by that name in London and was ready for its maiden voyage. The rigging of the 3 white masts with canvas sails rattled with the wind as her father spoke, adding to the noise of the rambunctious crowd. Henrietta was a small, thin girl and about 5 years old. The gray woolen shawl did little to prevent the chill from entering her small bones. She could feel the coldness in her father's heart, even as he lifted her for all to see. The ship was being named after her, the owner's only daughter, born after 5 sons whom he treated with contempt and flogged at the least provocation. Soft tears fell down her cheeks, yet she attempted a sullen smile to please her father and the crowd of sailors who had come only because they knew the captain would provide free liquor. The salt smell of the sea and the heavy smell of the men's breath and sweat mingled in Henrietta's memory. She felt weak and dizzy. Supper had been meager that night. A little brown bread and some cold potatoes cooked the day before, as her mother had been unable to rise from her bed. Her father had let go of the family servants as they were costing too much money, and he needed that money to build his ship, which he said would make their fortune. Henrietta's mother was ill of consumption. Her coughing seemed to get louder and longer every day. Henrietta would cover her ears when her mother coughed. The weariness of this world was getting to her mother. 6 children and the harsh unpredictability of her husband's moods left little room for hope. Even at her young age, Henrietta knew that her mother saw only grayness, and the part of her mother's spirit had already left this earth. Henrietta's father had been gone for days. When he came home, he smelled of the blasted bottle, as her mother called it. That particular day he had stomped into the house, ranting and raving because a fire had gone out and there was no wood for fuel. He had not gone out to buy the wood, but had roughly grabbed Henrietta under his arm, slamming the heavy wooden door behind them. Henrietta looked in her mother's eyes for one brief moment before she left, trying to silently reassure her. Henrietta felt the fear reflected like a mirror from her eyes to her mother's and back again. Her brothers hid in the recesses of the stone house. The wooden door had swung back and forth in the stony silence. Henrietta looked out at the sea and saw a white gull dancing near the foamy waves, calling softly amid the clamor. She concentrated on the bird and pretended she was the gull. She let the bird fly deeply, forever etched into her memory. The bird flew effortlessly, then gracefully and with much focus dove into the dark waters, emerging with a fish in its beak. The fish was swallowed quickly, and the gull flew freely over the crowd, unknowing of the sorrowful significance of the scene, the naming of the newest merchant slaver, the Henrietta Marie. The pale girl, Henrietta Marie, envied the gull. How she would love to soar over the waters beyond the horizon, beyond the foamy waves, to where the water appeared smooth and calm, and the sun glistened with its yellow light illuminating the dark waters. She thought, someday I will follow the gull and feel the wind on my skin as I leave this place. I will grow a garden of yellow roses. A loud cry awakened Henrietta from her imaginings, as one unsteady sailor had fallen in the water and been roughly hauled out by his rowdy companions. Upon being rescued, he slugged the rescuer, and a fight ensued. Soon several of the sailors were assailing each other. Her father lifted Henrietta onto the wagon, shouted for the driver to take them home, and promptly fell asleep beside the driver, snoring loudly. Occasionally he would waken to shout at his driver for hitting the bumps on the road. Then he would just as quickly fall back into a drunken slumber. Henrietta watched the commotion on the streets. Vendors were selling fruit, vegetables, and sausages from woven baskets. Children with soot-covered faces played in the gutters. An old man in tattered rags was huddled in a doorstep. As she rode by, he reached out a skinny finger and pointed to her, smiling a toothless smile. She nodded at him and put her head down on the coarse straw, falling asleep. She dreamed that the old man was sitting in the bow of the ship, pointing his finger at her and screaming. She shuddered as she slept, and the wagon rolled bumpily down the road. Her father shouted curses as the driver entered her dream. In the dream, her father was yelling at the old man sitting in the bow of the Henrietta Marie while his ship was filling with seawater, and the sails were torn and the masts broken. Black clouds and howling winds filled her dream world. The ship's bell rang over and over. Henrietta moaned softly. Then in her dream she saw the white gull glowing with light, soaring over the ship and landing on the yellow sand of a distant shore. The call of the gull was soft and sweet, echoing in her memory and forever etched in her mind. The story will be continued.